Stockton Rush, Titan Sub-Death Plan. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. 2 years ago, a doomed expedition in the Titan sub became news around the world as a consequence of the fact that Stockton Rush, the man that had created the submersible, and those accompanying him all died when the sub imploded. The expedition was seen as rather foolhardy, which moved me to analyse the life and behaviours of Stockton Rush to make a determination as to what he was. And if you haven't already accessed that intriguing assessment, I would encourage you to do so. There are a series of videos about him, analysing all of the evidence to make a determination as to what he is. A recent report has made a startling suggestion. Stockton Rush, the mastermind behind the Titan submersible expedition of 2023, didn't just want to tour the wreck of the Titanic. He intended to die there. That's the disturbing claim made by a close friend of the late OceanGate CEO, who alleges that the multimillionaire engineer was suicidal and hell-bent on writing himself into the mythology of the world's most infamous shipwreck, even if it meant sacrificing 4 others in the process. Carl Stanley, an expert in commercial submersibles, told Matthew Gavin Frank for his new book, hence why we're getting to hear about this, Submersed, Wonder, Obsession and Murder in the World of Amateur Submarines, that Rush's ego was so big he was willing to die and kill to be pivotal to the character of this story. He wanted to go die at the wreck of the Titanic. The more high profile, the better. He didn't just murder 4 wealthy people and get paid a cool $1 million to do it. They are all part of the Titanic mythology now. 12 days after Titan imploded in the North Atlantic in June 2023, killing 5, Stanley messaged Frank via WhatsApp with a chilling declaration that Rush had known exactly what would happen during the vessel's final fateful trip. Stanley claimed that Rush actively plotted for the fatal plunge to be a one-way trip, a deliberate death dive engineered to cement his legacy in the history books, aboard a futile vessel that had never been intended to return. He was, in fact, a good engineer, said Stanley. He set a new standard for going out with a bang, which is interesting because many other people have commented on how he wasn't a particularly good engineer and how the submersible had various design flaws and that Rush just wouldn't listen to people when they pointed that out. According to Stanley, Rush named his doomed sub after the fictional British ocean liner Titan from the 1898 novella Futility by Morgan Robertson, in which the fictional ship sinks in the North Atlantic after striking an iceberg, in an eerily similar fashion to how the Titanic met its fate 14 years later. Stanley alleged that in order to extend and to be part of the wider Titanic folklore, Rush needed to compel more than just his own death, and he needed to knowingly fabricate a futile vessel, costumed in a Titanic name as his murder weapon, Frank writes. The fellow sub-enthusiast further claimed that Rush designed the Titan to be a mousetrap for billionaires. Asked if he truly believed that Rush actively intended to kill everyone on board as part of a suicidal vanity project, Stanley didn't waver. I know this is what happened. 4 years before the Titan disaster, Stanley had accompanied Rush on one of the vessel's test dives in the Bahamas, where the pair and 2 others dived to a record-breaking Titanic-level depth of 12,336 feet. The day after the voyage, he wrote an email to Rush raising alarm bells about what he deemed to be significant safety issues. His concerns stemmed from ominous gunshot-like sounds thundering out every 3 to 4 minutes during their hours-long descent. Stanley feared that the deafening noise was the sub's hull buckling under the immense pressure of the deep. The sounds were observed yesterday sounded like a flawed defect in one area being acted on by the tremendous pressure and being crushed, damaged, he wrote. From the intensity of the sounds and the fact that they never totally stopped at depth, it would indicate that there is an area of the hull that is breaking down, getting spongy. Stanley implored Rush to postpone any further dives, particularly with paying passengers until the issue could be properly investigated. I don't think you push forward with dives to the Titanic this season. I think it will be succumbing to pressures of your own creation, in some part dictated by ego to do what people said couldn't be done, he wrote. In a heated reply, Rush ordered Stanley to keep his opinions to himself, insisting that he hadn't been invited to take part in the test drive to give feedback on the design or safety of Titan. I value your experience and advice on many things, but not on the assessment of carbon fibre pressure hulls. I hope you, of all people, will think twice before expressing opinions on subjects in which you are not fully versed, wrote Rush. But refusing to back down, Stanley laid out a grim and vivid image for Rush about what awaited him at the end of the reckless path he appeared to be treading. How I like to make decisions is by considering the worst-case scenarios. The worst-case scenario of delaying diving until you've identified the defect, making all that noise, is some disappointed customers and financial woes, wrote Stanley. The worst-case scenario of pushing ahead and not listening to the hull yelling at you involves Patrick Leahy, who is a rival, and some Russian oligarch tooling around a Russian nesting dolls version of a wreck site in a made-for-TV special, telling his version of how things went wrong. I hope you see option B as unacceptable as I do. 4 years later, Stanley's worst-case scenario would be realised in front of the world's watching eyes. It then goes on to describe what went on, which we are familiar with regard to the tragic consequences of the submersible imploding. Now, in my analysis of Rush, based upon extensive evidence, I concluded that he was a narcissist. And therefore, this raises an interesting question. Might it be that a narcissist fully intended to go there and to kill himself and be part of the legend of the Titanic? On the one hand, you could see how that might well play to the oversized ego of a narcissist. How it would be the ultimate act of control by deciding, I'm going to withdraw from the world, but I'm going to go out in a blaze of glory, full in the knowledge that I am now forever tied to the legend of the Titanic. And thus, one could see an argument that a narcissist would do this. Furthermore, having no emotional empathy for the passengers, he wouldn't care that they died as a consequence of his pursuit of legendary status. However, whilst there is a case that could be made for this, ultimately, I don't believe that that is accurate. More likely, Rush would gain far more by demonstrating that he was the one that had a sub that could go down to the Titanic and back, because this would result in more people wanting to do it, which would make money, which is a residual benefit, and it would also be reported on around the world, with the consequence that he would receive fuel from a variety of different sources. He would be seen as a pioneer. He would be a living legend, which ultimately, remember, as I've explained previously, that while some narcissists can commit suicide, it is unusual. And with narcissism being a self-defense mechanism, it is far more likely to want to keep the narcissist alive with regard to the issue of maintaining control, drawing fuel, getting character traits and residual benefits. I see it as far more likely that Stockton Rush, his narcissism, would deem that he would gain far more by undertaking this exercise and gaining fame whilst alive, rather than purposefully setting out to die. Indeed, setting out to die would also be indicative of failure, and that would run the risk of people thinking, well, whilst you're tied to the Titanic, you're tied to the Titanic as having failed, because your submersible didn't work. And that's not something that a narcissist would want to countenance, because the narcissist is always right and always successful. I see it as far more likely, because of Rush's narcissism, that he was foolhardy with regard to what he did, believing that he was invincible, believing that his way was the best way, that he had done everything that was possible to ensure that the trip was a success, and that suicide was not something that he would contemplate. That he, ultimately subconsciously, would gain far more from successfully undertaking this trip and believing that he would do so, whereby he could control many people, that he would draw lots of fuel from them and gain residual benefits. And to that mind, whilst one can understand the argument that a narcissist might embark upon a suicide mission without any due regard for the impact upon other people, with regard to Stockton Rush, I see it as far more likely that he wanted to survive and gain fame that way rather than go out through suicide. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.